The iPad 2 originally came out in 2011 and improved on the first iPad in every way possible. New slimmer design, much better specs, cameras. The iPad 2 is one of the biggest iPad upgrades Apple's ever made. Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and today we're taking a look at the second generation iPad. How does it hold up in 2020? The iPad 2 got iOS support from 2011 all the way till late 2016. To this day, it's not that uncommon to see someone using this, and that's not a negative thing. While brand new iPads right now are some of the best value they've ever been, and I would still recommend people buy them, the second generation iPad can have its uses. The most common one likely being the reason my family still uses it: for young children. It can play some basic games and has access to streaming apps like Netflix and Amazon Prime. Disney Plus isn't on there, which is unfortunate, but there's still some use you can get out of having one of these around. Prepare to be very annoyed if you do though. This iPad suffers the curse of the A5 chipset, or in other words, it runs like crap on iOS 9. It's slow, unresponsive at times, buggy, and is all in all just a bad experience. If you're using it regularly, you might end up going a little crazy. That, or you'll get used to it, which is kind of even worse in a way if you think about it. But I might be getting ahead of myself here. Let's start with the design of the iPad 2. It's fully aluminum like the first iPad, but is significantly slimmer. It is curved on the back, which makes it fit in the hands very nicely. The overall design is simple, but it was a huge improvement over the first iPad. It felt more premium, smoother. This design was used a couple more times with the iPad 3 and 4 before the iPad Air would come out and change things up. I do think the iPad Air was a much needed upgrade, but for 2011 this design was amazing, and even now it doesn't feel unnatural to hold and use this iPad. It is a bit hefty, but most of the time you're not really thinking about it. The front of the iPad should look pretty familiar given that there are still iPads right now that look roughly the same. It does have very thick bezels and an old home button surrounding the 9.7-inch display. It is non-retina and has a fairly low resolution of 768 by 1024. The iPad 3 would bring a retina display, which is much nicer. There are some benefits to the lower quality screen. The iPad 3 chugs thanks to how many pixels it pushes, and it has double the RAM of the iPad 2. So the iPad 2 with a good screen, yeah, it would be very slow. Also, battery life on the iPad 2 is actually surprisingly very good in my experience. This iPad has been used by my family since the iOS 7 days and will still last multiple days before needing a charge. And you say, well, sure, but the screen still sucks. Yeah, but my little brother doesn't know the difference between a good screen and a bad screen. Obviously, what we have now is a lot more pleasant to look at, especially with the 120 Hz on the iPad Pro. But this iPad, for the most part, holds its own when it comes to the design. Until the 2018 iPad Pro, iPads still kind of really looked like this, and they still do, some of the cheaper ones being sold. The iPad Air, it has thinner bezels, but it still has bezels and kind of has the iPad 2 look to it. Besides the update to the design, the other big upgrade was the addition of cameras. The first iPad didn't have any, while the iPad 2 has one on the front and back. They aren't good cameras, but they're here. The rear sensor has 0.7 megapixels, and it doesn't take great photos. They're actually terrible photos. Considering how much better the 4S's camera was from the same release year, I really would have liked to see something better here. I believe this is the same camera as in the 2010 iPod Touch 4th gen, and yeah, that's not a good thing. Regardless, this iPad has never taken good photos, and they look even worse in 2020, if that's even possible. Video recording can be done in 720p, believe it or not, although this sure does not look 720p. If you have to take pictures and record with a second gen iPad, I feel bad for you. Actually, I think I used to record myself on this iPad all the time, so I mean, at least it had a camera. I think that's the big thing. When I was young, I didn't really care what the quality was like, but that's not necessarily an excuse for how bad the cameras are. The selfie camera is 0.3 megapixels and is just horrible, but again, I guess it was there. The iPad 2 might have gotten to iOS 9, but it shouldn't have given the specs it had. We have Apple's A5 chipset, same as found in the iPhone 4S, as well as 512 megabytes of RAM. How do I say this? These are not good specs, and the iPad 2 is pretty darn slow on its latest version of software. iOS 9 has become infamous within the community for basically killing any device that ended on it. The iPhone 4S, the iPad 2, the iPod Touch 5, the first iPad mini, and the 3rd gen iPad. None of these devices run iOS 9 well, and while the 3rd generation iPad does have more RAM, again, all of them struggle pretty equally when it comes to the overall overall experience. And when I say it's slow, it is hard to show it on camera because little spots of lag here and there don't really seem like a big deal. But it's indicative of the entire experience, not just these 10-second clips. While you can and would likely get used to it, the iPad 2 feels painful to use on a regular basis. That said, again, it does have its uses. Because it has iOS 9, as slow as it actually isn't too terribly old, and so we can get access to relatively modern versions of some apps. YouTube actually works pretty well on here, and so does Netflix and Prime Video, and they do this by letting you download the latest compatible version. Because of this, as said before, my 3-year-old brother will often use it for Paw Patrol or whatever he watches in there. Again, no Disney Plus, which sucks, but there is still some life left in this iPad if you can find a way to utilize it. It isn't useless, although to be fair, it isn't particularly useful in most situations either. If you don't really need it for streaming media, there isn't much else to do with it. I suppose some older games would run on here, and you could do web browsing if you're willing to deal with the speed or lack thereof. One thing you could potentially do to speed up your iPad is downgrade it to iOS 8. iOS 8 retains relatively recent-ish versions of apps, but makes the entire experience just a bit faster. I wouldn't go back to any iOS version before iOS 8, as they're just frankly too old, but if you jailbreak, you can mess around with that kind of stuff if you'd like to. Cool Booter, for example, lets you dual boot with an old version of iOS, like iOS 6. Jailbreaking can also let you potentially speed up a few things and improve your time with it, so it is something worth considering if you have an iPad 2 that you really want to use for some reason. And definitely don't buy an iPad 2. It's one thing to still use one if you have it just laying around, but if you're thinking you need a tablet for Netflix or something, the iPad 2 is not the one to get. I'd recommend literally anything better, honestly. But again, if you have one stuffed in a drawer somewhere, maybe pull it out and see if you can find something to do with it. I think for most of us who still have an iPad 2, it's a good time to move on and consider getting a brand new iPad for as low as $329 off Apple's website. That's a good deal and one worth taking advantage of. That said, anyone still have an iPad 2? What are you using it for? Let me know in the comments down below. If you found this video interesting, maybe hit that like button and consider subscribing for more content just like this. You can follow me over on Twitter and Instagram at 91_tech if you'd like to for some reason. With that all being said, thank you so much for watching. I'm Josh from 91tech, and I will see you all next time.